Martin was never the type of person to believe in coincidences. He was an engineer working in Portland, Oregon, and he liked his structured world. His life consisted of the same days: work, home, the commute, and a bit of rest on weekends. He knew what he would do in 1 year, 5 years, and even 10 years. He didn't need to seek out adventure. His life was predictable, and that suited him just fine. Usually, he drove the same route to work. His mornings started the same way: a cup of coffee in his car, the news on the radio, and the usual road through the suburbs toward his office. But today was different. That morning, something caught his attention. As he was driving through one of the more remote areas of Oregon, where the road wound along cliffs and dense forests stretched on both sides, he noticed something on the side of the road. There weren't many cars here, and the area was untouched by the city, with nature surrounding him on all sides. At first, Martin thought it was just another piece of discarded trash or something left behind by other travelers. But then something in the silhouette made him slow down. On the side of the road sat a strange creature. It looked like a mix between a wolf and a dog, but far more gaunt and exhausted. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its body was marked with deep wounds. The creature sat on the ground motionless, its eyes filled with pain and desperation. It stared at the car, but it didn't try to run away. There was no fear in its eyes, just a silent plea for help. For a moment, Martin hesitated. He'd never been one to approach wild animals, but there was something in the animal's gaze that made him feel like he couldn't just drive by. He slowly applied the brakes, and despite his usual caution, opened the car door. He stepped out, walking toward the animal. His heart was pounding faster than usual. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to stop, but he knew he couldn't just leave it there. He had to help. As he got closer, he saw the deep gashes on the creature's body. The back leg had a deep cut, and its sides and neck were covered in what looked like bite marks. This wasn't the work of another dog. This looked like the aftermath of an attack by a wild predator, perhaps a wolf or even a coyote. Yet, despite the severity of its injuries, the animal didn't show any aggression. It didn't try to run. It simply sat there, as if it were waiting for help. Martin slowly crouched down beside it and extended his hand. The creature didn't flinch. He moved a little closer and gently placed his hand on its back, but he didn't want to scare it any more than it already was. Its eyes locked onto his, and though it didn't move, there was something in those eyes that Martin couldn't explain. It wasn't just a silent acceptance. It was a look that seemed to say, "Please help me. What happened to you?" Martin thought to himself, feeling a pang of sorrow. He remembered how his father used to say that there are moments in life when you need to do what your heart tells you to do, not what logic dictates. This was one of those moments. He couldn't just drive away and leave this animal to die by the side of the road. He stood up slowly and walked back to his car. His heart was racing faster than normal. When he returned with his first aid kit, the animal was still sitting there, unmoving. Martin took out the sterile wipes, bandages, and antiseptic, knowing that this was only a temporary solution. He couldn't save the animal on his own, but at least he could stop the bleeding for now. Carefully, he began to clean the wounds, trying to be as gentle as possible. The animal flinched when the antiseptic touched its open wounds, but it didn't try to run or bite him. Martin worked as quickly as he could, though he knew that the severity of the injuries would likely require more than just a first aid kit. The creature needed proper care, veterinary treatment. As he worked, he kept thinking about what to do next. This wasn't an ordinary situation. He had to get the animal somewhere safe, somewhere it could get the care it needed. He could feel that time was running out, but where could he take it? Portland was not far, but the journey through these winding roads could be dangerous for an animal in such a fragile state. "I can't wait any longer," Martin thought, looking around. He remembered the nearest animal shelter, and he quickly grabbed his phone. The nearest vet clinic said they wouldn't have a specialist available for a few hours. Time was critical. He knew that if he didn't act now, the animal might not survive. After a moment of thought, Martin made the decision. He had to take the animal to the nearest shelter. It was about an hour's drive, but he couldn't risk waiting. He gently lifted the injured creature into his arms, feeling its weak body tremble. But more than just the animal's physical fragility, he could sense something deeper, a kind of silent bond between them. He knew this animal had been through hardships before, but something about its current state made Martin realize that his life, too, was about to change. The road was quiet, almost eerily so. Martin carefully drove through the winding, narrow streets, the injured animal resting its head on his lap. He had wrapped it in an old blanket from the back seat, trying to keep it warm. He could feel its labored breathing and hear the occasional whimper. The animal was clearly in pain, and Martin's heart ached for it. Despite the urgency of the situation, Martin couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection with the creature. He had never been one for pets or animals in general, and yet, here he was, taking care of this wild animal as though it were his own. He thought back to the moment when he had first seen it by the side of the road. It had looked so helpless, so vulnerable, and now, as it lay there in his arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow their paths had crossed for a reason. The shelter was still about 45 minutes away. Martin drove as carefully as possible, taking the curves of the road slowly, trying to keep the animal steady. There was no way he could take it to a traditional vet clinic. He knew the staff would be too focused on treating household pets and would be unable to deal with the wild animal. He had called the shelter earlier, and they had assured him they could take care of the creature, but he knew that time was running out. He just hoped he could get there before it was too late. As he drove, Martin's mind raced. He had never been in a situation like this before. He thought of his life, of the predictable routine he had followed for so many years. This was not the life he had imagined for himself. He had always been focused on his career, on his job. He had never really thought about making a difference in the world, never thought about stepping outside of his own bubble. But now, with this animal in his arms, everything seemed different. It was as if the universe had placed this creature in his path to teach him something about himself, about compassion, about the unexpected moments in life that change everything. The headlights of his car cut through the darkness, illuminating the winding road ahead. He glanced at the clock. He still had some time. The shelter wasn't far now, but he knew the animal would need immediate care once they arrived. He had to be prepared for whatever came next. He couldn't afford to lose it. He had come this far. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp gasp from the animal. Martin looked down, seeing the creature shudder in pain. It lifted its head slightly and gave a low whine. Its eyes locked onto his with an intensity that startled him. For a moment, it was as though the animal was trying to communicate with him, trying to tell him something. Martin's heart raced as he gently stroked its fur. "It's okay," Martin whispered, though he wasn't sure if the animal could even understand him. But somehow, the words seemed to calm it for a moment. It lowered its head back onto his lap, its breathing still shallow, but at least it wasn't trembling as much. Martin felt an overwhelming need to help, to do everything he could to keep this animal alive. He wasn't a doctor, and he didn't have the training or the knowledge to heal it completely, but he could try. He had to try. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shelter came into view. The parking lot was empty, save for a few cars, and the building itself looked a bit worn down. But the lights were on, and Martin could see a figure standing outside waiting. He quickly parked the car and rushed to the back, gently lifting the animal from the seat and cradling it in his arms. As he walked toward the shelter, he was met by a woman in her mid-40s, wearing a faded blue jacket with the shelter's logo on it. Her face was kind, but there was a sense of urgency in her eyes when she saw the animal in his arms. "What happened?" she asked quickly, her tone professional but compassionate. "I found it on the side of the road," Martin replied, his voice strained. "It's been attacked, probably by something wild. I don't know how bad it is, but it needs help right now." The woman nodded quickly and motioned for him to follow her. "Come inside. We've got a vet on call, and we'll do everything we can. You did the right thing by bringing it here." Martin followed her into the shelter, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. As soon as they entered, the woman immediately guided him to a back room where a table was set up. She motioned for him to lay the animal down, which he did carefully, making sure not to cause any more distress. The vet arrived almost immediately, a tall man in his late 30s, dressed in a green scrub and carrying a medical kit. His face was stern, but when he saw the animal, his expression softened. "Let's take a look," he said, immediately getting to work. The next few hours passed in a blur. Martin sat in a chair nearby, watching the vet and the shelter staff work on the injured animal. They cleaned its wounds, administered fluids, and performed a series of tests. After what felt like an eternity, the vet turned to Martin. "It's a miracle you found it when you did," he said, wiping his brow. The animal was in critical condition. There were multiple deep lacerations, and it had lost a significant amount of blood. If it had been left any longer, it might not have made it. Martin let out a deep sigh of relief, but the worry didn't leave his chest. "Will it survive?" he asked quietly. The vet nodded. "It's going to be a long road to recovery, but we've stabilized it. With time and proper care, it should make a full recovery." Martin felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to something beyond himself. He had saved this animal's life, and in doing so, he had found something inside himself that he didn't even know was missing. He looked down at the creature, now resting peacefully on the table, its breathing steady. It wasn't out of the woods yet, but it was no longer fighting for its life. And that, to Martin, was the greatest victory of all. The following days were a blur for Martin. After leaving the shelter, he couldn't stop thinking about the animal. He had checked in every day, and each time, he received positive updates. The creature, a wolf dog of sorts, was recovering well, although its journey was far from over. It would need weeks of care and rehabilitation before it could fully heal, but it was no longer fighting for its life. Martin couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility. He had never been a pet person, and never in a million years would he have imagined being the one to save a wild animal. But something about this situation stirred something deep within him, a realization that there was more to life than his predictable routines, his work, and the quiet isolation he had grown used to. He had always been focused on logic, on calculations, on the certainty of numbers and data. But now, with this creature's fragile life in his hands, he realized that not everything in life could be controlled or predicted. The shelter had asked Martin if he wanted to help with the animal's rehabilitation, as it would need constant care for the next few weeks. At first, he hesitated, unsure of what that would entail. But he knew that leaving the animal to recover alone at the shelter was not an option. He had already become too attached. He had made a promise to this creature, whether spoken or unspoken, that he would help it. So, every evening after work, Martin drove to the shelter to spend time with the wolf dog. He would sit with it as it rested, talking to it softly, gently stroking its fur as it gradually regained strength. The wolf dog had a quiet, intelligent gaze that seemed to understand everything. There was an unspoken bond between them now, a connection that Martin couldn't describe but felt deeply. As the days passed, the creature grew stronger. It began to walk again, though its movements were slow and tentative at first. But each small step felt like a victory. It wasn't just the animal who was changing, though. Martin was too. Every evening, after he spent time with the wolf dog, he would drive home in a quiet reflection. His thoughts had begun to shift, and the world around him seemed a little brighter, more meaningful. He had always been a solitary person, content in his own world. But now, he was starting to realize that connection, true connection with others, whether human or animal, was something he had been missing all along. One day, as Martin sat with the wolf dog, watching it attempt to climb onto a low bench for the first time, the shelter worker who had first greeted him at the door approached. She smiled warmly as she watched the animal struggle to get its footing. "You've done wonders for this one," she said, her voice soft but filled with appreciation. "We're all grateful for what you've done." Martin looked up at her, a bit surprised by the compliment. "I didn't do much," he said quietly. "I just helped when it needed me." She shook her head. "You've done more than that. You've given it hope. And hope is the hardest thing to give someone, or something, in a situation like this." Martin smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. "I think it's given me hope, too." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What do you mean?" Martin hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his emotions, especially not with someone he hardly knew. But in that moment, he felt like he had to share what he was feeling. "I've always lived my life by the numbers, you know. Everything was about precision and predictability. But this wasn't predictable. And in a way, that made it feel more real, more meaningful." The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we can't plan for. They happen when we least expect them, but they have a way of changing everything." Martin glanced down at the wolf dog, which had now managed to settle on the bench, though it was still a little shaky on its feet. He couldn't help but think about how this animal, this wild creature that had once been on the brink of death, had brought him out of his shell in ways he never thought possible. It had shown him a side of himself he had long ignored, the part that cared, the part that could love and connect, even if it was with something as unexpected as a wounded animal. He had spent his entire life avoiding uncertainty, avoiding anything that couldn't be quantified. But now, he realized that perhaps that was what had been missing all along. Life wasn't about controlling every detail or knowing exactly what would happen next. It was about taking chances, stepping into the unknown, and doing what was right, even when it was hard. As the days passed, Martin continued to visit the wolf dog, and their bond grew stronger. The animal's recovery became more evident each time. It was no longer just lying in place, weak and fragile. It was beginning to explore the yard at the shelter, moving with more confidence, even wagging its tail occasionally when it saw Martin. There were moments when it would sit with him, resting its head on his lap, as though it had found comfort in his presence. One afternoon, as Martin was about to leave for the day, the shelter worker approached him with a question that caught him off guard. "Martin," she said, "have you thought about adopting this one?" Martin blinked, momentarily stunned by the suggestion. Adopting the wolf dog? He had never considered it. His life was simple, solitary. He didn't know the first thing about having a dog, let alone a wild animal that had been through so much. But something inside him stirred at the thought. I haven't really thought about it," he said, his voice trailing off. "But maybe I should." The shelter worker smiled warmly. "It's just a thought. But you've already given this animal a chance at life. Maybe it's time to give yourself a chance, too." Martin stood there for a moment, the words hanging in the air. He had always believed that his life was complete on its own. He didn't need anything extra. But now, with the wolf dog standing before him, looking up at him with trusting eyes, he realized that perhaps the thing he had been missing all this time wasn't something he could find in the quiet solitude of his predictable routine. Maybe it was time to open his heart. The suggestion lingered in Martin's mind long after he had left the shelter that evening. Could he really adopt the wolf dog? The idea seemed daunting at first, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt right. The wolf dog had become an integral part of his life over the past few weeks, and Martin found himself looking forward to those quiet moments with the creature. He could still remember the first time he had gently stroked its fur, and how the animal had looked at him with those trusting eyes. It was as if they had found each other at exactly the right time. Adopting it, what would that mean for him? He had always lived alone, kept to himself, and avoided emotional attachments. His life had been confined to his job, to his routine. But now, with the wolf dog's soft presence in his life, everything felt different. It was as though this animal had opened a door that Martin hadn't even realized was there, a door leading to something more meaningful. The next day, Martin couldn't shake the thought. He spent the entire workday distracted, his mind constantly wandering back to the idea of bringing the wolf dog into his home. By the time the workday ended, he was already on his way to the shelter. He didn't even hesitate when he pulled into the parking lot. The shelter worker, Sarah, was there when he arrived. She greeted him with a warm smile, though she could tell that something was on his mind. "Did you have a chance to think about what I said?" she asked. Martin nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I did. I think I want to adopt him." Sarah's smile widened, and there was a noticeable glimmer of approval in her eyes. "That's wonderful, Martin. I'm so glad you've made that decision. You've already proven to be such an important part of his recovery." Martin smiled faintly, though a part of him still felt unsure. Could he really give this animal a home? Could he handle the responsibility? The wolf dog was still recovering, still adjusting, and Martin wasn't sure how well he could manage everything. But as he stood there, looking at the animal now standing in front of him, tail slightly wagging, he realized that he was already committed. This animal had become a part of his life, and he couldn't just walk away. "I'll make the arrangements," Sarah continued. "We'll need to do a home visit, just to ensure that it's a safe environment. And there will be a lot of paperwork, but we'll walk you through the process." Martin nodded, already feeling the weight of the decision settling in. "I'm ready," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. After completing the necessary formalities, Sarah handed him a collar and leash for the wolf dog. "It's official now," she said with a grin. "You're his guardian." Martin felt a lump in his throat as he attached the leash to the wolf dog's collar. The animal didn't resist, instead following him closely as they made their way out of the shelter. Martin opened the door to his car and gently helped the wolf dog into the back seat, securing him with the seat belt. He felt a strange sense of pride as he climbed into the driver's seat. This wasn't just a new chapter for the wolf dog. It was a new chapter for him, too. The drive home felt different this time. The car seemed fuller, warmer. The wolf dog was quiet, but there was a calmness in the air. The sound of the wheels on the road, the hum of the engine, the occasional sound of the animal shifting in the back seat. These things now seemed to create a kind of harmony that Martin hadn't realized he had been missing. It wasn't just the silence that had been his constant companion before. Now, there was the quiet presence of something else, a living, breathing being that shared his space. When they arrived at Martin's house, he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. His home was small but comfortable, a modest place with a cozy living room, a few shelves filled with books, and a kitchen where he often prepared simple meals for himself. It was a place that had always felt sufficient for him. But now, as he opened the door to let the wolf dog in, he couldn't help but wonder how this creature would change everything. The wolf dog hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the air. It was as if the animal was assessing its new surroundings, taking in the smells, the layout, and the new environment. Martin stood by the door, watching it carefully. He knew that this would be a big adjustment for the animal. The last thing he wanted was for the wolf dog to feel frightened or out of place. "Come on in," Martin said gently, his voice soft but inviting. The wolf dog took a tentative step forward, then another, until it was inside the house. It moved cautiously, sniffing the furniture and the corners of the room. Martin watched as it explored the space, but there was something different about the way it moved. It wasn't as shaky or weak as it had been at the shelter. There was a confidence in its movements, a growing sense of trust. The animal circled the living room before finally settling on a soft rug near the fireplace. Martin watched it for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion sweep over him. This was real. He had made the decision, and now the wolf dog was a part of his life. It was no longer just about saving it from the side of the road. It was about giving it a home, a place where it could feel safe and loved. As the wolf dog lay down on the rug, its eyes half closed in contentment, Martin felt something stir deep inside him. It was a sense of peace, of something he hadn't felt in years. His life was no longer just about the work, the routine, or the predictable days that had once defined him. It was about this moment, about this bond with the creature who had unexpectedly entered his life and had changed everything. Martin walked over to the animal and sat down beside it, gently running his hand through its fur. The wolf dog nuzzled him, and for the first time in a long while, Martin felt truly connected to something greater than himself. It wasn't just about helping an animal in need. It was about finding a purpose, a deeper meaning in his own life. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. The first night was not what Martin had expected. After settling in, the wolf dog, whom Martin was still hesitant to name, seemed calm enough. It curled up near the fireplace, as if it had lived there all its life. Martin had prepared a soft bed for it in a corner of the living room, bought new food bowls, even laid out a few toys. He had done everything the shelter had advised to make the transition smooth. But in his heart, he knew this animal wasn't a dog, not fully. As the house fell into quiet nighttime stillness, Martin turned in for bed, leaving the wolf dog to rest on the rug. But sometime in the early hours, a sound woke him. A howl. Not a bark, not a whine. A long, low, mournful howl that sent a chill down Martin's spine. He sat upright in bed, heart pounding, listening in the dark. Another howl followed, quieter this time, as if restrained. Not pain, not fear. It was grief. Martin stepped out of bed and quietly walked to the living room. The wolf dog sat upright on the rug, facing the window. Its head was lifted, eyes fixed on the moonlight spilling through the glass. The animal looked ancient, like it had seen 1,000 winters, and carried the memory of them all. "You miss the wild," Martin whispered. The wolf dog didn't turn to look at him, but its ears shifted at the sound of his voice. Martin walked over and sat beside it. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat, letting the silence of the house wrap around them like a blanket. Outside, the trees rustled in the wind, and somewhere far away, a coyote called into the night. "I don't know what your life was before," Martin said softly, his eyes tracing the outline of the wolf dog's powerful frame. "But I know you didn't belong in a cage." The wolf dog lowered its head slowly and rested it on Martin's leg. That simple gesture undid something in him. Martin wasn't used to vulnerability, not in himself, not in others. But here was a creature, half wild and half domesticated, laying its head on him like he was its only tether to this world. It was a moment that couldn't be explained by logic or science. It was trust, raw and unspoken. The next morning, Martin called in sick for work. He wasn't ready to leave the wolf dog alone just yet. And truthfully, he wasn't ready to be away from it either. He spent the day making the house safer, securing the backyard fence, removing any sharp objects from low shelves, patting the hard corners of furniture. He even moved his workspace into the living room, so the animal would never feel alone. By noon, Martin sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the wolf dog roam the yard. It moved slowly, still favoring its left side, but there was a quiet strength returning to its step. Every few minutes it would glance back at Martin, as if checking to see if he was still there. He always was. Later that day, Sarah called to check in. She asked how things were going, and if Martin had thought of a name. "No," Martin replied, glancing out the window. The wolf dog was lying in the sun, one paw twitching in its sleep. "Not yet. Feels like it should come from him, not me." Sarah chuckled. "That's fair. But he's not just a patient anymore. He's your partner now." The word stuck with Martin. Partner. He thought about that word long after the call ended. He had never really had one. Not in work, not in life. His relationships had always been distant, formal, practical. But now he was sharing space with something that demanded presence. Something that looked at him like he mattered beyond his use. That night, they sat together again in the living room. Martin watched a nature documentary on mute while the wolf dog slept. As he stared at the screen, something shifted in his mind. A memory. His father. Martin had grown up in the Rockies, in a small town in Colorado. His father had been a park ranger, quiet, rugged, a man of the land. Martin remembered the stories his father used to tell about wolves. How they weren't villains, but symbols of balance, of loyalty, of wild grace. His father would say, "You don't own a wolf. You earn its respect." Maybe that's what this was. Martin turned his gaze toward the wolf dog and whispered, "Do you remember the wild? Do you miss it?" The animal stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Martin leaned back into the couch, thinking about his own life. How far he'd come from those mountains, from his father's boots and firewood, and the sound of real silence in the forest. He'd buried that life under deadlines and reports and empty coffee cups. Now, maybe, just maybe, this creature was reminding him of who he used to be. The following days passed like a dream. Each morning, Martin woke to the sound of quiet paw steps padding across the wooden floor. The wolf dog, still unnamed, would greet him at the edge of the bed with a quiet, watchful stare. It didn't bark. It didn't whine. But its presence was enough to stir something warm inside Martin's chest. Routine began to take shape. Together, they walked the yard, and sometimes the quiet suburban street. Neighbors noticed. A few stopped to ask what kind of dog he was. Martin would pause every time, unsure of how to answer. "He's part wolf," he would finally say, watching their eyebrows rise. Some nodded with interest. Others gave a polite smile and stepped back. The animal had a presence that demanded respect, even fear. But to Martin, it was never about fear. It was about understanding. The wolf dog was healing, but still wary. Some nights it would wake with a jolt, ears perked, breath sharp, as if haunted by memories Martin couldn't see. He would speak softly, place a hand on its back, and wait for the tension to pass. Each time, it settled down just a little faster. On the sixth morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds and painted golden lines across the floor, Martin sat at the kitchen table with a worn photo album open before him. It had belonged to his father, filled with images of forest trails, animal tracks, and faded notes scrawled in pen. The kind of book you don't read so much as remember. One photo showed a wolf standing alone on a ridge, its silhouette sharp against the setting sun. Underneath, his father had written one word, Ashar. Martin stared at it for a long time. The memory came slowly, his father's voice telling the story behind it. It's from the old tongue, means ghost of the forest. A wolf that walks between two worlds, never fully wild, never fully tame. Martin looked up. The wolf dog was curled by the fireplace, its coat glowing warm in the morning light, its breath slow and steady. "Ashar," he whispered. The animal's ears twitched. He tried it again, this time louder. "Ashar." The wolf dog raised its head, eyes meeting Martin's. It wasn't confirmation, not in the human sense, but something shifted in that gaze. A glimmer of recognition. Like a name being remembered rather than learned. "Ashar," Martin said again, walking over and kneeling beside him. He placed a hand gently behind the animal's ear. You're a Shar now. You've always been. From that day forward, something was different. A Shar responded when called, not with obedience, but with acknowledgement. When Martin spoke his name, the wolf dog would turn its head, ears alert, eyes steady. It wasn't about dominance. It was about trust. Martin began documenting everything: a Shar's diet, his reactions to sounds and scents, his sleeping patterns, how he moved. It wasn't just curiosity. It was awe. Every day brought a new piece of the puzzle. A Shar wasn't just recovering. He was adapting. But he never lost the wildness in his bones. One evening, after returning from a short walk, Martin saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A Shar stood at the back of the yard, still as stone, staring into the woods beyond the property line. There was a tension in his stance, not fear, but alertness. Martin followed his gaze and, for a brief moment, thought he saw movement in the trees. A flash of fur. A rustle. Then nothing. A Shar didn't bark or chase. He simply watched. Martin called his name once. A Shar turned his head slightly, then walked slowly back toward him, brushing his side against Martin's leg before sitting down beside him. The woods were calling. That much was clear. That night, Martin sat by the fire with the Shar curled beside him. The flames flickered softly, casting long shadows across the walls. Martin sipped from a mug of tea and stared into the fire. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured. "The call of the wild. It's still in you." A Shar didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the rug. "I'm not going to hold you here," Martin continued. "I know you're not mine. Not really." He reached over and scratched behind a Shar's ear. "But while you're here, I'll give you everything I can." A Shar licked Martin's hand once, then lowered his head and let out a soft, content sigh. And just like that, the room was still again. The morning was colder than usual. A thin layer of frost clung to the windows, and the sky above the treetops was the color of steel wool. A Shar stood by the door, already alert, tail gently swaying. Martin laced his boots slowly, knowing that their walks had become more than just exercise. They were sacred now, a ritual of sorts. Man and beast, shoulder to shoulder. They walked deep into the trees that bordered the back of Martin's property. The pine forest stretched for miles, mostly untouched except by the deer trails and the quiet presence of things that never showed themselves during daylight. A Shar moved like smoke between the trunks, low, focused, ears flicking at every sound. Martin had begun to notice how differently the world moved around a Shar. Birds quieted. Squirrels froze. The wind seemed to speak in a different tone. Even his own footsteps felt heavier, more foreign, compared to a Shar's graceful glide over moss and root. As they reached a clearing, a Shar suddenly froze. Martin stopped too, heart tightening with instinct. A Shar's nose lifted into the wind. His ears pricked forward. Then slowly, he stepped ahead, nose low, eyes fixed on something unseen. Martin followed carefully, unsure what had drawn the wolf dog's attention. A minute later, they found it. A small fox, barely alive, curled in a shallow dip between the rocks. Its fur was patchy and blood-matted around a hind leg that looked twisted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move as they approached, too weak, too afraid. A Shar didn't growl or lunge. Instead, he crouched low, eyes locked on the fox, but posture relaxed, curious. There was no threat in his presence, just attention, respect. Martin knelt beside the creature, frowning as he assessed the wound. "Another survivor," he murmured. "Another soul the world forgot." The fox's eyes flicked toward him, wild and fevered. Martin knew better than to touch it without a plan. But he also knew he couldn't just leave it. Not in this cold. Not like this. He turned to a Shar. "You found her. What do you want me to do?" A Shar didn't move. But the way he stood, calm, unmoving, was answer enough. Martin pulled off his jacket and gently wrapped it around the fox. It whimpered, barely audible, but didn't resist. Carefully, slowly, he lifted the animal into his arms. "You're not the only wild one in this house anymore," Martin said as they made their way back. By evening, the fox was settled in the mudroom, a quiet space, warm and softly lit. Martin made a nest of towels and placed water nearby. He called a wildlife rehab center to report the find, knowing full well they might want to take her in. But something in him hesitated. He had the experience, the shelter, and now a Shar. Maybe they could handle one more. Over the next few days, Martin did what he could. Cleaned the wound, applied salves, fed the fox mashed meat with a dropper. He named her Briar, after the thorny bush near where she was found. It suited her, sharp, wild, and hard to approach, but with something fragile buried beneath. Ashar kept his distance, but never far. Every morning, he would stand by the mudroom door, watching silent. Every night, he would curl a few feet away, as if guarding her in the only way he knew how. Martin couldn't help but feel a shift in the energy of the house. Where once there was silence, now there were layers. Soft footsteps, muffled rustling, the smell of pine and fir. The air buzzed with the quiet hum of life returning, healing, and with that came memories. Martin found himself dreaming again, not nightmares, but half-formed visions of the past. His father's laugh, the crackle of a fire in the old ranger cabin, the feeling of running through woods with scraped knees and a stick for a sword. He'd buried those parts of himself, pushed them into dark corners, and called it adulthood. But now, with Ashar and Briar under his roof, the forest had returned, not just outside his window, but in his bones. One night, as he stepped out onto the porch, he heard it again. A howl. Not from Ashar, from deeper in the woods. Ashar stepped beside him, muscles tight, eyes glowing in the moonlight. "You know them," Martin said quietly. Ashar didn't look at him, but his ears flicked forward. The call came again, distant, echoing, but unmistakably a wolf. Martin felt a strange ache bloom in his chest. He knew what was coming. Ashar's past wasn't a mystery anymore. He had family out there. A pack. Blood that called to blood. The wild didn't forget its own. And Martin, was he ready to let him go? He didn't know. The days that followed were strange. The forest had begun to speak again. Every dusk brought another howl from the tree line, some distant, some closer. Each time, Ashar would go still, ears tilted, eyes locked on the horizon like he was deciphering a message only he could understand. Martin pretended not to notice at first. He kept busy, tending to Briar, who was slowly gaining strength, and writing notes about her recovery in the same journal he now used for Ashar. He cleaned the house more than usual, rearranged the furniture, cooked elaborate meals he barely tasted, anything to keep from thinking about what was coming. But Ashar knew. He began spending more time at the back of the property, nose in the wind, body tense. His eyes seemed farther away now, not distant, but deeper, like he was slipping between this quiet life and something older, something rooted in dirt and blood and howling skies. Martin sat on the back steps one evening, watching Ashar stare into the trees. He didn't call him, didn't say anything, just watched. The sky was golden violet, the kind of color that doesn't last long. Shadows stretched across the lawn like fingers. "You feel it pulling you," Martin said aloud. Ashar flicked his ears, but didn't turn. Martin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I never planned for this. I just wanted to help. Pat you up. Give you a place to rest. I didn't think I'd care this much." The words felt raw in his mouth. He wasn't used to saying things like that out loud. Not to people, and certainly not to animals. But Ashar wasn't just an animal. He was something else. A bridge between what was lost and what was waiting. "I don't want to keep you here," Martin continued. But I don't want to lose you either. Ashar turned then. Not all the way. Just enough for their eyes to meet. It wasn't pity in that gaze. Or regret. It was understanding. That ancient, wordless understanding that wolves carry in their bones. He would leave. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And Martin would have to be the one to let him go. That night, a storm rolled in. The sky cracked with lightning, and rain came down in sheets. Briar, now strong enough to limp on her own, had retreated under the kitchen table. Martin lit a fire and kept his journal in his lap, half writing, half thinking. Ashar paced by the windows. The storm seemed to agitate him. He moved from room to room, restless, nose at the glass. Finally, Martin opened the front door. "You want to go out?" Ashar stepped forward, then paused. Rain hit his fur and ran off in dark rivulets. Thunder rolled across the hills. Then, without looking back, he stepped into the storm and vanished into the trees. Martin stood in the doorway, soaked and shivering, watching the dark swallow him whole. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, listening, waiting, hoping. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and heavy with dew. Martin walked the edge of the forest, calling softly. No answer. He waited the rest of the day. Still no sign. Even Briar seemed quieter, pacing the mudroom like she sensed something missing. When night fell again, Martin stood on the back steps, staring into the woods. "Ashar," he whispered. A howl answered, not close, but not far either. It wasn't goodbye. Not yet. 3 nights passed. Martin began to accept that Ashar might not return. That maybe, just maybe, he had found his pack again. That maybe the strange, powerful chapter in Martin's life had served its purpose. He found a rhythm again, caring for Briar, reconnecting with old ranger friends online, even starting a blog where he shared stories of wildlife encounters, under a pseudonym, of course. But on the 4th night, just as he stepped outside to lock the shed, he heard it. Soft, heavy, familiar. Paw steps. Ashar stood at the edge of the lawn, soaked in moonlight. He looked different. His coat was cleaner, eyes brighter. There was something regal about the way he held himself now. He trotted up to Martin without hesitation and pressed his head gently into Martin's chest. "You came back," Martin murmured, voice cracking. Ashar let out a low sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Something in between. Something grateful. Martin wrapped his arms around the great creature and held him. Not like a pet, not like a possession, but like a friend. Ashar had gone to the wild, and he had come back. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. The weeks after Ashar's return felt like the quiet breath after a long-held note. There was no fanfare, no big moment, just the slow settling of something that once felt uncertain and wild into something solid and understood. Ashar was different now, not tamed, but balanced, like a pendulum that had finally found its center. He came and went. Some mornings, Martin would wait to find Ashar already gone, paw prints trailing into the misty woods. Other times, he'd return before dusk, his fur carrying the scent of cedar and snow, his eyes alert and wise. But he always came back. Always. Martin stopped wondering where exactly Ashar went, whether it was a pack he'd found or something more solitary. He didn't ask. The forest had its secrets, and Ashar was one of them. But now, he shared a part of that secret with Martin. Briar, meanwhile, had made a full recovery. Her leg healed into a limp, but she could run again, short bursts of energy across the lawn, her thin frame growing stronger each week. She stayed close to the house, never straying far from the mudroom that had been her first safe haven. She and Ashar developed a strange rapport. He didn't treat her like a pup or prey. He watched her with a kind of quiet detachment, respectful, patient. Sometimes they would lie near each other in the sun, not touching, but undeniably together. One morning, Martin sat on the porch steps, sipping hot coffee and listening to the birdsong. Ashar lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes closed. Briar trotted around the yard, chasing the shadow of a hawk overhead. It was peaceful, too peaceful. That was the thought that crossed Martin's mind when he noticed the truck. It was parked at the end of the long gravel driveway, an old, dusty F-150 with Montana plates. Not a neighbor's, not local. A man stepped out, tall, weathered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a serious expression. He stood there a moment, scanning the property. Martin stood, heart already picking up pace. Ashar rose silently, gaze fixed on the stranger. The man didn't speak at first. He simply walked closer, boots crunching over gravel, eyes never leaving Ashar. "You Martin Quinn?" the man finally asked. Martin nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Name's Ward. I think we need to talk." Martin stepped forward. "About what?" The man gestured to Ashar, who stood still, silent, calm but ready. "About him." Martin said nothing. Ward pulled a folded paper from his coat, an official form, already yellowing at the edges. "We've had reports of a missing hybrid from a research facility. Northern breed. Part of a long-term behavioral study on wolf dog cognition. One of our GPS collars went dark about 2 months ago. Then we started getting sightings. Then someone sent me this." He handed Martin a photo. Ashar. In the woods. Taken from a trail camera. Martin's breath caught. "He's not property," he said quickly. "He's free. He's healed. He's more than what you think he is." Ward didn't look unsympathetic, but he didn't lower the paper either. "That might be," he said, "but if this is who I think it is, then he was born into our care, raised as part of a controlled study. There are legal implications here, especially if he's bonded with a civilian in an uncontrolled environment." Martin looked at Ashar. Ashar looked at him, silent, still. "I didn't take him," Martin said. "He came to me. Hurt. Abandoned." "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," Ward said. "I'm just here to assess, to observe. If it's him, well, we have options. But one way or another, I need to file a report." Martin felt something shift in his stomach. A cold weight. Ashar, sensing the change, moved to stand beside him. Not in fear. In solidarity. Ward noticed. He studied the animal. "He's not behaving like one of ours anymore. The ones we raise, most of them never adapt this well. Never return to the wild so easily." "He's different," Martin said. Ward nodded. "Yeah, he is." Then he tucked the paper back into his jacket. "I'm staying in town for a couple days," he added. "I'll come back. We'll talk more." He turned, walked back to the truck, and drove off down the road. Martin stood there for a long time, the hum of the engine fading into the trees. Ashar pressed his head lightly against Martin's leg. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The sun rose slowly the next morning. A thin fog clung to the grass, swirling in ghostly patterns across the open field behind the cabin. Martin stood on the porch with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold in his hands. Inside, Briar slept curled up on the old rug, twitching softly in her dreams. And Ashar was gone. Not vanished, just out in the trees, where he always seemed to go after things felt heavy. Martin didn't blame him. He felt the weight too. It sat in his ribs like a stone. Agent Ward hadn't come back yet, but he would. And when he did, Martin knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that a choice would have to be made. He didn't know what kind of pressure the agency could apply. He didn't know if they would take Ashar, or try to, or threaten to. He just knew that the wild doesn't belong on paper. It doesn't belong behind fences or glass, or wrapped in bureaucratic red tape. The wild belonged to the wind, to the trees. to the kind of silence you feel in your chest more than your ears. Ashar had reminded him of that. He heard paw steps behind him. Ashar padded up the porch steps like he'd lived there his whole life. His fur was wet from dew, and a single pine needle clung to his ear. He looked up at Martin as if to say, "I know what's coming too." Martin knelt in front of him. "I won't let them take you." Ashar blinked. Not a promise, not a protest, just an understanding. That afternoon, Martin packed a bag. Not for himself. For Ashar. He didn't know why. Maybe just instinct. He slipped a strip of cured meat inside. A little pouch of ash from the first fire Ashar ever laid beside. One of the river stones they found on their hikes. A few drops of essential oil from the pine balm that helped heal his wounds. He tied it all into a small leather satchel and looped it onto the woven collar Ashar had grown into. "You're not leaving," Martin said quietly, "but just in case." Ashar stood patiently. When he looked at Martin, it was like staring into something older than time. That night, Ward returned. He parked in the same place, walked the same way up the path. But this time, Ashar stood in the doorway, and he didn't move. Ward stopped at the bottom step. "I reviewed the data," he said. "The facility confirmed he's the one. Genetically, behaviorally, everything matches." Martin didn't say anything. Ward looked up at Ashar. "But I also spoke with the lead on the project, and he said something interesting." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," he said. "If the animal has truly integrated into the wild and bonded with someone out there, then he's completed the purpose of the study in ways we never expected. If he's thriving, leave him be." Martin's mouth went dry. "You're serious?" Ward nodded. "We got other cases to worry about. Other animals that need real intervention. That wolf dog outlived the project that created him. He's yours now. Or rather, he's his own." Martin swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you," he said. Ward turned to go. "Don't thank me. Thank the people who still believe in the wild." That winter, snow fell in thick sheets across the valley. Briar grew bold, darting in and out of the trees like a streak of red lightning. Martin built a greenhouse off the side of the cabin, finally following through on an idea he'd sketched years ago but never acted on. And Ashar remained. He was still a creature of both worlds, sometimes gone for hours, returning with burrs in his fur and stories in his eyes. Sometimes lying by the fire, head resting on Martin's boots. He never wore a leash. Never needed one. Martin started writing again. Really writing. He published a piece under his real name, an essay called "What the Forest Remembers." It went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. It told the story of loss and wilderness, and the quiet bond between a man and something untamable. He ended it with one line. "I didn't save the wild. The wild saved me." One spring evening, long after the snow had melted and the rivers swelled with thaw, Ashar stood on the ridge behind the house and howled. It wasn't a call of loneliness. It was a song of place, of belonging, of return. Martin stood beside him, hand resting lightly on Ashar's shoulder. "I hear it too," he said. The trees swayed in rhythm, and somewhere beyond them, the wild answered back.